we're been reading from chapter 5, Healing and Wholeness. And tonight we're going to be reading section 3. And it's very clear to me now that sections 1, 2, and 3 of this chapter are perhaps one of the best ways to understand how the Holy Spirit works within your mind. But it's not always obvious the first time you read it. So I recommend you review these sections more than once. Sometimes the statements are very subtle and you really have to ponder it for a moment to understand how that applies to you and to your own experiences. But this really is, I think we're very fortunate to have these explanations that we're reading through tonight. So here's an idea just to warm up. It says in chapter 5 that you cannot understand yourself alone. For alone, you isolated from everything else, you have no meaning. If you were divorced from all relationships, from all people, from all of life, you have no meaning. And so, and we'll read about this tonight, as a consequence of this, it is a mistake to look for the Holy Spirit in yourself alone. And this is a mistake many miracle students make, to be so interested in what the Holy Spirit is guiding you to that you exclusively look to yourself for guidance of the Holy Spirit. That is an ego perspective that isolates you from everybody else, looking for the Holy Spirit alone. And what we will read tonight is that the best way to strengthen the Holy Spirit's voice in your own mind is to recognize it in other people, so that you're not looking for the Holy Spirit in yourself alone, so that you are listening for the truth in other people. And you can do that in these classes. You can listen for the truth when people are sharing, so that when you'll be aware, wow, that really speaks to me. You're hearing the Holy Spirit through another person. So with that, we will begin our reading of section 5.3, and I want to thank David Welton for being our reader tonight.
3. The Guide to Salvation. The way to recognize your brother is by recognizing the Holy Spirit in him. I have already said that the Holy Spirit is the bridge for the transfer of perception to knowledge. So we can use the terms as if they were related, because in his mind they are. This relationship must be in his mind, because unless it were, the separation between the two ways of thinking would not be open to healing. He is part of the Holy Trinity, because his mind is partly yours and also partly God's. This needs clarification, not in statement, but in experience.
And the clarification will come in the next paragraph, so we'll get to that in a moment. It does mention two ways of thinking. Just real quick review. There is knowledge and there is perception. Knowledge is a perfect understanding, is being communicating perfectly with the mind of all creation. It is pure insight. What we experience here in time is perception. And perception is always an interpretation based on the information you have available to you. So it's fragmentary and less certain. But it turns out that there are two flavors of perception. So there's really, while there's two kinds of thinking, there's a third flavor of perception. There's perception based on fear and perception based on love. And the whole purpose of this course is only to help you transfer from perception based on fear to perception based on love, which will prepare you for the final step, which is the transition back, the return back to perfect awareness of all creation, back to knowledge. So how do we get started on that? Somebody would say, Tracy Green used to say, sounds good. How do we get started? Well, we get started by learning to hear the voice of the Holy Spirit. And the emphasis of today's material is that you strengthen the voice of the Holy Spirit when you pay attention to the Holy Spirit in your brother. The way to recognize your brother is by recognizing the Holy Spirit in him. And that is not an intellectual undertaking, but it is an experience. By the way, you can have that experience right here in this class, or in any encounter where a person might be just speaking nonsense for a long period of time, and then they say, and I'm really looking for help. And all of a sudden you hear a call from their soul, and you respond to that. So you're listening with your soul for the call from their soul. So it's an experience, and tonight's session is about helping all of us to get closer to recognizing that experience. Let's go on.
The Holy Spirit is the idea of healing. Being thought, the idea gains as it is shared. Being the call for God, it is also the idea of God. Since you are part of God, it is also the idea of yourself, as well as of all his creations. The idea of the Holy Spirit shares the property of other ideas because it follows the laws of the universe of which it is a part. It is strengthened by being given away. It increases in you as you give it to your brother. Your brother does not have to be aware of the Holy Spirit in himself or in you for this miracle to occur. He may have dissociated the call for God just as you have. This dissociation is healed in both of you as you become aware of the call for God in him and thus acknowledge its being.
So there's a term here, dissociation, and we will pair it in this paragraph with the call for God. So the Holy Spirit, what's the Holy Spirit do? Is the Holy Spirit is a lighthouse, a guide to help everyone find their way back to God. It's metaphorically a call to return back home. And this course is to help you hear that call and strengthen it in your mind and recognize that it's also in the mind of everyone else, and for you to participate in strengthening that call. The opposite of that is disassociation from the call of God. That's to distance yourself and not associate with the call of God, to fill your mind with all sorts of other illusions and idols so that you essentially completely forget the call for God. That's the ego's agenda, to dissociate your awareness from the call. So when we say the Holy Spirit is the idea of healing, it brings that part of your mind we call the ego that is preoccupied with other things. It brings that part of your mind back into awareness of the call of the Holy Spirit, the call to return. And therefore your mind then heals, because the holy part of your mind is already pure and perfect. And the Holy Spirit brings the part that is occupied with the ego back into union with the holy part of your mind. So, and this, for you to experience this, you must be willing to share this with your brothers. You cannot isolate yourself in the experience of this. And so when we encounter others, be aware that within them too, there is the call for God. And there's also this tendency to disassociate from the call of God. And it says right here, your brother does not have to be aware of the call of the Holy Spirit in himself for the miracle to occur. It is enough that you are aware of it. That is necessary, that you be aware of it, and that you recognize that that call exists in the other person, even if they're totally clueless. So you recognize, this is important, you recognize the call to love, the call to heal exists within everybody, regardless of the appearances or the words they might be saying. You honor that call within them. The byproduct of your doing that is it strengthens your understanding of the Holy Spirit in your own mind. Can you see how by listening closely for the soul, indications of the soul of somebody else, by honoring their soul, how that has benefits to your own soul? So this is more of an experience. I would say already in what we've said tonight, you understand enough about what it is, but the practice of that on a regular basis is something that all of us need to do habitually until it becomes second nature. Okay, so two opposite ways of thinking go on inside our mind. David?
There are two diametrically opposed ways of seeing your brother. They must both be in your mind because you are the perceiver. They must also be in his because you are perceiving him. See him through the Holy Spirit in his mind, and you will recognize him in yours. What you acknowledge in your brother, you are acknowledging in yourself. And what you share, you strengthen.
We're going to read the next paragraph too.
The voice of the Holy Spirit is weak in you. That is why you must share it. It must be increased in strength before you can hear it. It is impossible to hear it in yourself while it is so weak in your mind. It is not weak in itself, but it is limited by your unwillingness to hear it. If you make the mistake of looking for the Holy Spirit in yourself alone, your thoughts will frighten you, because by adopting the ego's viewpoint, you are undertaking an ego alien journey with the ego as guide. This is bound to produce fear.
So please spend some time reviewing these two paragraphs again later. It's so foundational. So we'll spend a moment here just making sure everybody is clear. Within each and every one of us, there are two diametrically opposed thought systems, points of view, reference frames that exist within you and within everybody else. As a miracle worker, it is our task to see the Holy Spirit in others and in ourselves. And when you acknowledge it in others, you are simultaneously acknowledging that it's true for you as well. And this strengthens your ability to detect it. The whole idea here is that we're talking about the voice of your soul, the voice that comes from your soul. That voice is quiet and gentle and has been drowned out by all this negative self-talk of the ego. And so we need to learn to strengthen our ability to hear that voice. As it says, the voice itself is not weak. It's just that we haven't been willing to listen to it. And so the voice is plenty strong, but it requires a different type of listening than what we have been habituated to. And so the way, how do you strengthen it? The way you strengthen it is to share it by listening to it in others, and this will increase it in strength. In fact, if you don't try to listen to the voice in the Holy Spirit in others, then that leaves you with trying to only hear it in yourself. This is a mistake. And as a result, you will adopt the ego's approach to finding the Holy Spirit. This can't work out well. The ego's approach to finding the Holy Spirit, which is to separate yourself, dissociate from other relationships, and only be preoccupied with what's going on in your own consciousness. It's a mistake of looking for the Holy Spirit in yourself alone. And that, because you're using the ego's approach, which is fundamentally frightened, your thoughts will frighten you because you'll be using ultimately the ego as your guide. This has to produce fear. This shouldn't require any convincing here that this approach produces fear. Therefore, back to the top is see your brother through the Holy Spirit in his mind. Recognize the good in his soul, even if it's not easy for you to detect it. Be on the lookout for the glimmer of light within the soul of your brothers. Noel?
Two things. Last night, somebody talked about praying to the Holy Spirit for guidance for taking away fear. Now, that's a singular endeavor. So how do we look at that in terms of only sharing perception of the Holy Spirit with our brother? And second, if your brother is not physically, a brother is not physically present with you, is it just as powerful to see the Holy Spirit in that brother anyway?
So Noel, on the second question, what do you think the answer is? Yeah, right. Absolutely. Physical presence is not required. In fact, most of the times you'll think about other people, they're not standing in front of you. And yes, it does have an effect on your ability to tune in to these soulful communications by the Holy Spirit. So physical presence is not necessary. This is a spiritual experience that transcends physical presence.
Well, and also from the standpoint of oneness, physical presence isn't necessary.
Correct. Correct. Not necessary. On your first question, because you had a two-part question there, we really need to go back to chapter 2, which is the fear chapter. Okay, I'm calling it the fear chapter. It's the most effective chapter for understanding the role of fear. You cannot ask the Holy Spirit to remove fear from your mind. You cannot. Why? Because we put the fear thoughts are the result of our own thinking and putting our faith in those thoughts. What the Course says is, since it's your faith, you have free will to decide where to place your faith, and that if you place it into fear, you will be fearful, but your same free will, you can remove your faith from those thoughts, see them as illusions, as not real. And then you can ask the Holy Spirit to replace it with another thought, a correct thought. But you are the producer of the fear, and therefore only you can stop producing the fear. We call it remove your power, placing your power into fearful thoughts, remove your investment and your faith from fearful thoughts. The Holy Spirit then can help you with another way of looking at things, which is a peace and healing based way of looking at things. So that's covered in more detail in chapter 2. So we can't spend, we can spend time and overtime if you want to do follow-ups with that. Susie?
I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't part of your question, Noel, how will that help my brother if my, well, you said fears, but if my thinking is healed? Was that part of your question? Because what I was going to say is that when I have replaced what you just said, Jonica, when I have healed some of my thinking, or when some of my thinking has been healed, then that is very beneficial to my brother or to people around me, because my behavior is so different. So then I get to share or integrate or not be so separated or fragmented from my brothers the way I used to be when so many of my thoughts weren't healed and I was in such a separated state. So I don't know, that's just kind of what I heard maybe in your question. So I just feel like I have such a different relationship to people now than I used to have, based on so much of the healing that has happened.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I don't know.
May I respond?
Surely, go ahead.
That wasn't my intent in my question. But you make a great point, a wonderful point, that as you quote, work on yourself, everything, the relationships of to everyone around you is changed. I meant more directly thinking about another person. Let's say if I'm upset with them, if I'm annoyed at something they said or did, or if they are suffering in some way, not having to do with me, and I want to help them. So those are other more direct, you could say, ways of it for helping another individual who comes to mind.
Yeah, there's when we look at this, there are many different forms in which these things arise. Your mind is confused, or your mind is healed. The other person's mind is confused, or the other person's mind is clear, and who's doing what. So there's it starts to take on many variations. So for the purposes of what we're doing here, focus on first principles. First principles meaning you cannot pursue the Holy Spirit listening only to yourself. You must be willing to open your mind to the recognition the Holy Spirit is in everyone, and that there's a somewhere inside each person, there's a call to return to love inside them, even if the outward appearances are not consistent with that, and that we honor that call in them regardless of the outward circumstances. So that principle has to be anchored as a first principle. Richard, you're open.
This is mind-blowing. It's what I'm going through right now. What's interesting with me, I'm hearing, even in my voice, the resonance inside. I'm not speaking up like I'm trying to, I guess the word would be hidden agenda. I always had that. And I wasn't concerned about giving. I've always been concerned about getting. And through that, I never formed any meaningful relationships with any human being, including my own family members. So what I'm hearing here is that I have everything that I need right now. If I listen to this, it offers that, be that.
Mm-hmm.
And that for me would be the profound personality change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was more of and I'm not indifferent towards politicians. I was always trying to get something out of someone at the least cost to me. So this is what I'm hearing here, and enjoying myself, get involved. And this is the true end of, I guess would be more of a psychological isolation than physical.
Yes, it is. It is more psychological. Yeah. Very
So
good.
the rapport is there. It establishes a rapport, meaningful. Excuse me. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, brother. Okay, so please, paragraphs 3 and 4, spend some time on there. The Holy Spirit is weak in you, but you can strengthen it, but not by yourself, by listening to it through other people. And that's a listening that goes beyond words, by the way. Sometimes you might ask a person, how you doing? And they go, oh. It's not even a word being expressed there, but they're communicating. They're communicating. So so there's an art form to this. We'll talk about that more as we go on. David?
Delay is of the ego because time is its concept. Both time and delay are meaningless in eternity. I have said before that the Holy Spirit is God's answer to the ego. Everything of which the Holy Spirit reminds you is in direct opposition to the ego's notions, because true and false perceptions are themselves opposed. The Holy Spirit has the task of undoing what the ego has made. He undoes it at the same level on which the ego operates, or the mind would be unable to understand the change.
And go one more paragraph, David.
I have repeatedly emphasized that one level of the mind is not understandable to another. So it is with the ego, the Holy Spirit, with time and eternity. Eternity is an idea of God, so the Holy Spirit understands it perfectly. Time is a belief of the ego, so the lower mind, which is the ego's domain, accepts it without question. The only aspect of time that is eternal is now.
Okay. We've repeatedly said that one level of the mind is not understandable to another. And I have a way of trying to illustrate that here by illustrating the levels of mind. You would be very familiar with your conscious mind. It's the part of your mind you use while you're waking. You would also be familiar with the idea of the subconscious. Sigmund Freud called that the id. It's the lower mind that stores the content of your experiences, but it's largely things that you don't think about normally unless there's some trigger. And then, very important for the purposes of our conversation here, is your higher conscious, your superconscious, where the Holy Spirit dwells. This is where your soul inhabits your superconscious mind. And your soul and your lower subconscious mind do not understand one another. They speak in a different language. One speaks in darkness, the other speaks in light. One speaks of time, the other speaks of eternity. One speaks of dissociation from others, separation. The other speaks of joining and of union. They're entirely different. And so this program is one where you stop listening to the lower mind and you start paying more attention to your higher mind, your superconscious mind. And we're learning tonight that you need to do that in relationships with other people. And the Holy Spirit is your helper in this. You are not alone in this process. In fact, I don't believe anyone could do it without the Holy Spirit's help. Because what the Holy Spirit, for everything that the ego says to you that is a lie, the Holy Spirit has an answer, which is the truth. And the Holy Spirit has the task of undoing what the ego has said, and he does that at the same level on which the ego operates. Otherwise, the mind would be unable to understand the change. So I want to use a very pedestrian example. Let's say I am sitting and thinking of thoughts, I don't have enough money. I'm not going to be able to manage my life. I lack money, so I'm very afraid. Well, if I'm willing to recognize that I just made that thought up and just put my faith in that thought, But I can choose another way of thinking. I can turn to the Holy Spirit and say, I'm willing to let go of this thought. Help me replace it with the answer. And the Holy Spirit will undo the error at the same level on which the ego operates. So the answer will come in at a level of understanding at the same level in which the error was made, not at some highfalutin level that has no relationships whatsoever to time or space, but at a level that is useful to you. So only the Holy Spirit can translate these messages of helpfulness and healing down to the level where your mind can understand it. She is the translator, the inspiration, the messenger of healing ideas put in terms that you can understand. All this is predicated, of course, in your willingness to invite her understanding into your mind and to let go of the illusions that you had invested in. That's the essential part. That's what all chapter 2 is. You must be willing to let go of the illusions you have made about yourself and life and love and relationships. And then if you've made that decision, the Holy Spirit then can certainly replace it with a truthful idea. Heidi?
I have 2 questions. I'm actually making a chart, so I want to make sure I understand it properly. So forgive me if you've already answered this.
It's all right.
At the top of the chart, we have God. And then under God, we have the Holy Spirit, which is our soul,
Yep.
which is our guide,
Yep.
which speaks to our mind, which we have 2 of. One is fear and one is love.
Yep.
So there's a lower and a higher.
Yep.
And then under our mind, we have our ego.
Yep.
So our ego is not part of our mind, it's separate.
Well, it's part of the psyche, but it's the lower mind.
The lower mind, okay. Now, where does Christ come in?
Well, if you look on the chart on the screen, by the way, it was very good summary you just did, Heidi. There are the subconscious mind has a superficial level. So this is Course in Miracles. I'm not talking psychology here. This is from Course in Miracles. The subconscious mind has a superficial level, which is all the nonsense that you pour into it whenever you're afraid or believe in guilt and judgment. And
Which
Heidi,
is your lower mind, correct?
this would be your subconscious mind, which is the ego part of it is your lower mind. Yes.
Okay.
Terms here can be a little loose here, but deeper down in your subconscious is where your Christ conscious mind exists. It's where miracles come from that level. There's a level down there, Heidi, that is set in the Course to be a solid foundation. It's the common bond that links us all together in the Christ mind. And that part of you, again, miracles come from there. When they begin to percolate up into your awareness, Heidi, they're intended to come up into your consciousness so that you know a miracle's about to happen. But if your subconscious mind is all filled with nonsensical fears and doubts and darkness, they interfere with the miracle impulse. And so the whole purpose of this course is to clear out the preconscious parts of our mind that are full of past traumas and guilts and pains and narratives, to clear that out so that there's no interfering messages when the miracles begin to arise into our awareness.
So does the Holy Spirit control the Christ mind?
No. They work in harmony. Holy Spirit is interpreting the messages from God the Father.
Yes.
Christ is kind of, think of it more as tactical. When two or more are gathered, like right now in this meeting, where two or more are gathered, the Christ mind is there looking to help people to heal their relationships with one another.
Understood.
So it's very in the moment. It's very time conditioned. Whereas the Holy Spirit is speaking messages that are for all time.
Okay. Could I ask one more quick question? I'm sorry. Well, I'm
That's all
not
right.
sorry, but
Go ahead. No,
No.
they're actually questions everybody should have.
if I, the past couple years, I don't sleep. And I truly beg every night I have conversations with the Holy Spirit. Please take my mind and help heal it and help me sleep, and over and over and over. And I truly mean it. If it's not happening, why? What am I doing wrong?
So that question, Heidi, let's talk at the end of class.
Okay.
All right, because I think that's in the area of personal counseling.
Okay. I'm sorry.
So no, that's all right. But hang on after class. Let's talk.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for those questions. That was a very good deep dive onto that. I wanted to do that anyway. So let's let David read now.
The Holy Spirit is the mediator between the interpretations of the ego and the knowledge of the spirit. Her ability to deal with symbols enables her to work with the ego's belief in its own language. Her ability to look beyond symbols into eternity enables her to understand the laws of God for which he speaks. She can therefore perform the function of reinterpreting what the ego makes, not by destruction, but by understanding. Understanding is light, and light leads to knowledge. The Holy Spirit is in light because she is in you, who are light, but you yourself do not know this. It is therefore the task of the Holy Spirit to reinterpret you on behalf of God.
It's therefore the task of the Holy Spirit to teach you who you are, to reinterpret you, not in ego terms, but to reinterpret you in godlike terms, the way you were created to be. We are created by God in his likeness, but we don't know it. And so the Holy Spirit is here as an interpreter, so to help us to understand that. Again, probably the best way to think of the Holy Spirit as a translator who takes messages from eternity, eternal messages from heaven, and translates them into symbols that make sense to you now. What a gift. I mean, if without that gift, you would have good luck. But with this gift, so she uses the symbols, but she's not limited in her understanding just to the symbols. She understands the actual laws of eternity, but casts them in terms that can be grasped by us in our time and space environment. Susie?
I wanted to share something that happened to me today. It just reminded me of kind of what Heidi was saying yesterday about the ego taking over. And I don't know, it just feels appropriate.
Mhm.
And so I was asked to do something tonight, and I was going to, it got canceled, and that's besides the point. And I was feeling just some kind of anxiety over it, because in the past, I would have, well, definitely in the past, I would have gauged how I did with what I was going to do by my performance.
Yes.
And I was feeling some anxiety today. And I know by now that, and I say by now because it took me a long time, that I wasn't at peace. And so it's an immediate, I noticed that right away. And I know that some part of me or all of me or whatever is attaching something to my ego. So I was driving and I said to the Holy Spirit, hey, look, I know where I'm at. I know something's going on. You know, I can't exactly figure it out. Like, I can recognize the problem. I know I'm in my ego. I know it's some kind of separation. And it just all flooded into me, which was just a remarkable moment. And it's from doing these lessons over and over again. I was in level confusion. I was identifying with my body and how I was going to perform. And was I going to be good enough? And was everybody going to like me? And was I going to be invited back? And these are all the ego thoughts I've had my whole life. Well, most of us probably. And then this like light, which is understanding. I get it all now. Light just truly means understanding. This understanding came over me like, oh, I'm just supposed to go to have fun. And I don't even know what my purpose is for going. And, you know, I'm not really going for the reason why I'm going, and it'll all be fine. And I'm just attaching myself to the wrong, you know, to all these ego thoughts. And it was just this complete release. And it was like freedom of the bondage of what was myself. And it really was just the identification of, am I going to be good enough? Am I going to be enough? And ultimately, that's not even what's important. So I just wanted to share that because the ego just had such a hold on me. And I had to get quiet and pray and ask. But if I wasn't doing these lessons over and over and over again, and I am as God created me, and God goes, all of that stuff, I would not have known I was identifying with, I was in level confusion. I was identifying with my body. So this shit really works, you know? And then I just had a ton of peace after that. And it was like this diametrically opposed state, you know? So I just wanted to share it. Might help somebody.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so thank you, Susie. So the last line here is, it's therefore the task of the Holy Spirit to help you understand yourself in terms of God. And then David, next line.
You cannot understand yourself alone. This is because you have no meaning apart from your rightful place in the sonship. And the rightful place of the sonship is God. It's your life, your eternity, and yourself. It is of this that the Holy Spirit reminds you. It is this that the Holy Spirit sees. This vision frightens the ego because it is so calm. Peace is the ego's greatest enemy because, according to its interpretation of reality, war is the guarantee of its survival. The ego becomes strong in strife. If you believe there is strife, you will react viciously because the idea of danger has entered your mind. The idea itself is an appeal to the ego. The Holy Spirit is as vigilant as the ego to the call of danger, opposing it with his strength, just as the ego welcomes it. The Holy Spirit counters this welcome by welcoming peace. Eternity and peace are as closely related as are time and war.
So, couple principles that are be helpful throughout the remainder of this course to keep in mind. The Holy Spirit is just as vigilant as the ego is, only the Holy Spirit will not scream into your ear. The Holy Spirit is peaceful and gentle, so you have to turn to it and welcome the gentle way. Whereas the ego's way are much more brutal, much more forceful. So it's an entirely different type of listening. These opening sentences, I think, are as profound as you're going to find in this section. So I want to underscore them. We have all made this error. Every one of us. I suspect we all made it today by trying to understand ourselves alone. By looking to ourselves and trying to grasp who we are, what is our purpose, and trying to do it in the context of disassociation of myself from everybody else. So, Heather, you cannot understand your function alone. It can only be understood in terms of your rightful place within the sonship. It can only be understood as a part of the collective because that's how we were all created, as a collective. And that's where we will find ourselves. And it is this that the Holy Spirit reminds you of. It's this the Holy Spirit sees you in terms of your relationship to all creation. And so it is an error that we all have made and will make again, but be clear. I think it even applies, if I can try to interpret here, if I may, Susie, your experience, your focus was on how you would appear there. The focus was on understanding how yourself would appear in that situation, how you'd perform, when actually the Holy Spirit sees these opportunities as all of us getting together and how we all can move forward. And so I try to remember that before these classes. It's really not about me, but there is something to be said for us and what will happen there. And that doesn't mean that I have it figured out or have words to describe it, but I realize that there's a rightful place in the sonship is the right framing for understanding all situations. By the way, the ego doesn't want to hear any of that, so it will attempt to react viciously in keeping the calm and peace, serenity that you might otherwise feel from your understanding. Yeah, okay. Richard?
No, I just heard you when you finished. I believe that what I'm hearing is that the Holy Spirit is accessed through silence.
Yes.
It cannot be, I'll leave it at that. And the ego, for me, has its own narrative. It has its own personality. And what it does, it obfuscates the
Mhm.
drive to the
Mhm.
Holy Spirit.
Yes.
It gets right in the way. I think in Hindu, it's called Maya. I may be wrong.
Yeah, and Mayan is a world of illusions.
Yeah, yeah. And it creates all, so what the Holy Spirit is doing for me, it's changing the narrative. It's not even listening to the narrative. It's
Yes,
just there waiting for me to surrender.
very good. Well said. Thank you,
I
brother.
didn't do it.
Truth. All right, thank you. Let's go on. David?
Perception derives meaning from relationships. Those you accept are the foundations of your beliefs. The separation is merely another term for a split mind. The ego is the symbol of separation, just as the Holy Spirit is the symbol of peace. What you perceive in others, you are strengthening in yourself. You may let your mind misperceive, but the Holy Spirit lets your mind reinterpret its own misperceptions.
Mhm. So this paragraph is very subtle, but also very profound. So for those of you that haven't been with this class that long, I understand it might not land in its full impact, but there's really something here. Perception derives meaning from relationships. Your perception of yourself, of life, of the world, of love, of anything that's valuable, it is derived in terms of its relationship to other things. They can't be understood in isolation. Nothing can be. You can't understand yourself in isolation. And so, but the ego will attempt to do that. Noel, this is why a glossary, I'm not in favor of a glossary where you take a word and you try to define it by itself. I prefer a method called a word cloud, where words appear along with other words that are related to it. And the meaning may not be so transparent right away, but emerges by the way it's used, so that words and symbols such as eternity can be understood in terms of peace and love and the Holy Spirit and creation, not by themselves. Yeah, so this is a technique that is used throughout the course. It's why a lot of terms you will notice in the course are just tossed out there without any prior reference point or explanation as to their meaning. Trust me, it's done all the time. And only as you follow how those words are used in subsequent paragraphs do you begin to see a pattern emerge of the relationship that they have. Well, by the way, the same thing is true of your experience of the Holy Spirit. Your perception of the Holy Spirit cannot be clear by itself. You cannot look to yourself for the Holy Spirit. You must look in terms of your relationship to others. Now, that means that you're going to have to open your soul to loving them. And after all, isn't that what the Holy Spirit is inviting you to do? How could you hear the Holy Spirit without being willing to love them? So its perception becomes meaningful to you in relationships, not only with people, but with experiences and other ideas. One more thing. When you perceive the Holy Spirit in others, we said this earlier, you are strengthening it in yourself. This is also true in the negative sense. If you perceive guilt in others, you're strengthening it in yourself. But if you're willing to take that guilt and give it over to the Holy Spirit, you can let your mind will misperceive, but then if you are willing to hand it over to the Holy Spirit lets your mind reinterpret its own misperceptions. Friends, this sentence here is the experience you must have. We're not aiming at perfection here. We are aiming at a situation where when a thought comes into our mind that is judgmental, guilty, or a grievance, that we learn to correct. And the Holy Spirit has the answer. It lets your mind reinterpret your own mistakes. I will go so far as to say that you must master that lesson. I don't know how you can move forward in this program without letting the Holy Spirit reinterpret your own misperceptions. I think we can babble Course in Miracles talk all the time, but unless the mistakes that your mind makes are being reinterpreted by the Holy Spirit, we're really not in the game. Game's the wrong word. We're really not a part of this program. We're playing on the margins. So a willingness to surrender your misinterpretations, a willingness to turn and invite the Holy Spirit for help, and then to receive a reinterpretation in the same mind and on the same level that the mistake had just been made. This experience is fundamental. And trust me, there are higher level experiences that can be had, but the foundation has to be in place for the higher level experiences. And so this is foundational. Heidi?
I'm worried. Something's wrong. I'm not understanding this. The Holy Spirit knows that we have a split mind, one of fear and one of love, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the Holy Spirit lets our mind, is that our fear mind or our love mind?
I think you know the Holy Spirit's talking through our love mind.
Reinterpret its own misperceptions. So it lets us fix what we have made up.
Essentially, yeah.
So it's allowing us to fix the lower ego fear mind.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Here's an example, Heidi. Let's say you and I are out and something happens, and all of a sudden I think you're guilty of something.
Yes.
And I got this whole big drama going on in my head about what you did and blah, 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 blah. Clearly ego, right?
Yes.
And all of a sudden now that would be the error, the
Yeah.
that's the misperception. But then for whatever reason, all of a sudden, a moment of clarity comes to me and I realize I'm talking from my ego.
Gotcha.
And I'm willing to change.
Oh, I do have this. I got it.
I'm willing to change,
Oh,
but I don't have the answer myself. So I say, Holy Spirit, I've seen Heidi as guilty here, and I know this can't be right. Help me to understand how to perceive this differently. And you can be sure she has a message there that comes through my soul into my conscious mind that says, you know what? Here's what's happened to me many times, Heidi. She says, you know what? You've done the same thing many times yourself.
absolutely. I got it.
And all of a sudden, I don't hold you guilty anymore. I just realized we're human beings. We made a mistake. Let's not make a drama about it. Let's, so my mind has been corrected, reinterpreted, not because I was brilliant and thought of the idea, but because I invited the messenger to help me with the correction.
How beautiful.
It is so beautiful.
That's beautiful.
And it's practiced 100 times makes it second nature. They're having the Masters golf tournament.
Yes.
These guys have gone out and hit the same ball on the same hole 100 times. They're at the best level in the world, and they've done the same thing 1,000 times. They practice it. So what we need to do is practice this letting go of our own guilt, our own grievances, turning the Holy Spirit, asking her for the answer. And then, as Richard said, be quiet so that we can hear our soul speak. The Holy Spirit speaks through our soul so that we can hear that, because it tends to be very gentle. Didn't we read a moment ago that the ego hates the calmness? It is so peaceful that the ego wants to introduce chaos. But the reality is the Holy Spirit speaks very softly and gently.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your questions, Heidi. Okay, I think we're nearing our close here. David?
The Holy Spirit is the perfect teacher. She uses only what your mind already understands to teach you that you do not understand it. The Holy Spirit can deal with a reluctant learner without going counter to his mind, because part of it is still for God. Despite the ego's attempts to conceal this part, it is still much stronger than the ego, although the ego does not recognize it. The Holy Spirit recognizes it perfectly because it is her own dwelling place, the place in the mind where she is at home. You are at home there too, because it is a place of peace, and peace is of God. You who are part of God are not at home except in her peace. If peace is eternal, you are at home only in eternity.
So, question for each of you: which part is stronger, The ego part in your mind or the Holy Spirit part in your mind? And I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm asking for your understanding of what the Course teaches. And it says it right there, it's underlined. Despite the ego's attempt to conceal the part that is for God, the part that is for God is still much stronger than the ego. Although the ego does not recognize it, the ego does not recognize that the spirit is stronger. So for all of you, and you know who you are, the Holy Spirit part, the part that is still for God, is forever. It was with you before time began. It's with you now, and will be with you throughout eternity. It's much stronger than this short-term ego nonsense that's been going on. Much stronger, much more durable. Which brings us to a concept that is something that is profound and spiritual. It has to do with your home. And I don't mean your dwelling place or your house. I mean your spiritual home. Where is it that your soul dwells? Where is your, no, I don't mean where is it at, I mean, where is your soul at home? So it's a spiritual concept. It doesn't really have to do with space at all. So if you said Florida, you're confused. That's not what I'm talking about. If you said planet Earth, that's not what I'm talking about. It's the idea. And so here's the teaching that you've already heard based on the ego, and that is that your soul dwells in time, in the 21st century, and in space here on planet Earth. You've heard that message before, that you're here in time and here in space, and the assumption would be, therefore, that's your home. That is not. So it is the task of the Holy Spirit to reinterpret your misperceptions for you at a level that you can understand. Your home is in God's peace. You're not at home except in his peace. And where is his peace? It's everywhere. You are at home only in the state of peace. And if you're not in peace, then you're not at home. In fact, this attribute we call peace of God is not a property. It does not come from time. It is not dependent on time. It is dependent on eternity. And so you are only at home in the eternal peace of God. Forever, everywhere, and only when you are at peace. Otherwise, you're not at home. You're temporarily confused. So it's the task of the Holy Spirit to translate these heavenly ideas into your mind at the level you can understand them. But there's an essential part that you play, and that is your willingness to let go of the insistence that you already know where your home is, to let go of your narrative, to your willingness to say, you know, I was confused when I decided all these things, so I'm probably don't know what's in my own best interest here. And so, Holy Spirit, I'm turning that over to you, teach me what you would have me know. Teach me where my home is. If you're willing to have that attitude of soul, and that is a soulful attitude, that is not an intellectual statement. Matter of fact, that's abandoning your intellectual position. I do not know what's in my own best interest. I do not understand, but I'm willing to learn from the Holy Spirit. If you're willing to do that, that attitude of soul, then the Holy Spirit has guaranteed you that she will speak to you. Let's finish up our formal reading here, and then we can talk some more.
The ego made the world as it perceives it, but the Holy Spirit, the reinterpreter of what the ego made, sees the world as a teaching device for bringing you home. The Holy Spirit must perceive time and reinterpret it into the timeless. She must work through opposites because she must work with and for a mind that is in opposition. Correct and learn, and be open to learning. You have not made truth, but truth can still set you free. Look as the Holy Spirit looks, and understand as she understands. Her understanding looks back to God in remembrance of me. She is in communion with God always, and she is part of you. She is your guide to salvation because she holds the remembrance of things past and to come and brings them to the present. She holds this gladness gently in your mind, asking only that you increase it in her name by sharing it to increase her joy in you.
Yes, she holds this gladness gently in your mind. Richard said, I need to be quiet to discern this gentle presence there. Yeah, so I think we've said everything that needs to be said here. So I'll repeat, these 3 sections in chapter 5, 1, 2, and 3 are the handbook for how the Holy Spirit works within your mind. It'll be elaborated on later for sure, but the foundational principles of her reinterpreting your own errors to your own mind in a way that you can understand are all right here. For instance, the Holy Spirit must perceive time and then reinterpret it into the truth, which is timeless. Now, these ideas may not immediately ring as an insight for you, but the more you follow the guidance of the Holy Spirit, the more familiar you become with her interpretations. And they become more and more second nature. Remember, the ego, remember, the ego teaches the opposite message. It's why we have to let go of the old narrative. But the Holy Spirit knows how to work through these opposites. And so you could never do this by yourself, but with the Holy Spirit as a guide, you are in the hands of a master at guiding and reinterpreting here. And she will bring you the truth that will set you free. And the gift, the rewards is that the Holy Spirit's understanding will become your own. You will understand as Holy Spirit understands. That's the end state. The goal is that our minds are no longer befuddled by the ego narrative, but instead are clear and calm and peaceful because we understand as the Holy Spirit understands. And into that mind, miracles happen all the time. Miracles are natural. They flow because there's no opposition in the mind that would interfere with it. Heidi?
You know, I just had the most incredible awakening. I was thinking back to chapter 1 and when we were done, and I said to myself, what a mind-blowing chapter. It's the best chapter I've ever read in my life. And then we do chapter 2, and I said the same exact thing. And I'm just so, every chapter gets more intense and so beautiful. It's just a spiritual awakening at each chapter is amazing. And I thank everybody for putting up with me.
Oh, we embrace you more than you realize, Heidi. By the way, you speak for me as well when you said those words you just said, Heidi. I feel the same way.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So that's as far as we're going to read tonight. That was a lot. You have your homework to do to review these sections. It's there, but because it's in a language that is opposite to the ego's language, it's not always clear at first. It takes some quiet time where you're not doing fast reading, but you're just doing a meditative type of reading, taking your time, and then listening. And then the reinterpretation, the Holy Spirit is in the business of reinterpreting things for you. And if you are quiet, like Richard was saying, I like to do that with the Course in Miracles in front of me, where I'll read a few sentences and then just pause and be quiet and see if anything comes. And if not, I'll read a few more. This is an ancient practice called Lectio Divina that's been practiced in the mid-centuries in Europe. So it's just quiet reading without reading for volume, and then interspersed with quiet listening and letting in with the invitation for the Holy Spirit to speak. If you're willing to do that, she's the guarantee that that voice will strengthen within you. And of course, we must repeat, then you put it into practice by listening for the Holy Spirit in others. So friends, that's as far as we're going to go tonight. Thank you. Heidi, thank you for your questions. I think they helped clarify a lot. So I want you to know I appreciate you. I honor you all. David, thank you for your reading. Thank you all for your comments. We'll look forward to getting together again real soon. Namaste.
Namaste. Jonica, can you stay on just for a moment?
Sure can. Yep, I will.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you, David. Thanks,